All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to part two of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network uh, series on wholesaling meat. So this week we're going to be talking about working with distributors, brokers, and all of the ins and outs of that. Last time, if you didn't catch it, we talked about pricing and margins in different sales channels. And so please do check out that replay. I'll have that in the chat for everybody to click on if you haven't seen it. And otherwise, we'll get going today. Today, we're again here to discuss the ins and outs of working with distributors, brokers, and everything in between in the interest of wholesale opportunities. So, this is also kind of in conjunction with the recent publishing of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network's Guide to Wholesaling Meat, which one of our educators here today was the author of. And I'd like to introduce Kathryn Quanbeck for anybody that doesn't know her. She's a meat salesperson extraordinaire who was once the program manager for NMPAN and now is with Stemple Creek and has worked with several other companies in between. And we're also here with Tom Richards of Richards Regenerative. And he's here to share some of the same. And we're all going to kind of be commiserating over our experiences with distributors and brokers and the like. So I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit further. But before we dive in, I did want to share just a quick poll so that we can just get a little bit of data about who's here. Give me just 1 second and we'll load that up. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just answering these 3 simple questions. That'll allow us to see who's here with us. Did everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Good, good. Welcome to everyone who's just joining us. Please do take a moment to fill out the poll before we get started. Just 3 short questions just to know who we've got in the room with us here. Got a really nice distribution of people across the country. Got a nice mix of processors and producers. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. And I'll just kind of end this now if everybody's had a chance to fill it out. And here you can kind of take a look at who we've got here in the room.
Oh, wow.
Nobody from the Rockies this morning. No one from Alaska or Hawaii, although it's quite early there still, I think. So we'll let them off the hook. Good deal. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for sharing that with us. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass it to Kathryn and Tom.
Actually, I'm gonna let Tom take it away. He's gonna
That's
start.
right. Tom's first this week.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. So Kathryn and I kind of sat down and we talked about kind of a 2-part process to how we're going to talk through this today. I'm going to talk about kind of our story as Richards Regenerative and kind of what we went through and how we went from a very, very small, zero, right, to where we are today and the experiences that we had. And then I'm going to pass it over to Kathryn and she's going to jump into some of the more nitty gritty. So we're going to start high level and then we're going to go down into the details. So give me a second here to share my screen. All right. And then, all right. Can everyone see this?
Looking good.
Yeah. Just, I can't really see you all and the presentation at the same time. So verbal cues will be helpful. Okay. So, who are we? So, Richards Regenerative, we started out as Richards Grass-Fed Beef. We're a ranching family out of just northeast of Sacramento in a little tiny town called Oregon House. And we went from just being a ranching operation and a cow-calf operation to starting out selling, wholes and halves and things like that to friends and neighbors. And then in about 2013 or 14, we realized we had something that, a product that people wanted, and we started to grow. And as we started to grow, this is where kind of the whole distributor situation came in. But we went from, the wholes and halves, and then we started to go after restaurants and gyms and all those kinds of things. And that's where it became interesting. So what was the model? So I broke the model out here so you could see kind of the two pieces, what we did in-house and what we did with a paid third party. And I kind of kept out some names, but we're spread so far around the country, I don't know necessarily if the names really matter, but if people are interested, we can talk about who we work with, and some of them I'll mention. But so anyway, we started out, we were a cattle, company. And as we started to sell beef, we started to having to manage the whole harvest process, the storage, right? Inventory management, storage, and all these kinds of things, and then selling the product ourselves, and then figuring out delivery. And as many of you may have experienced, right, when you're starting a company like this, you may not own the infrastructure, you don't have processing plants, you don't own trucks, and as you start to grow your company, you need to leverage third parties. So where we were leveraging third parties is the yellow, right? So we were using third party slaughter, and then one of the distributors we worked with was a secondary a processor and distributor, and I'll talk about them in a minute. And then they bought some of our product, and then we also stored, and we leased space at their facility. So we had and we started to get employees and leasing space and all these kinds of things. And then we had to sell and manage and or contract out for delivery of products. So in essence, we were managing every part of the whole supply chain. So we were not really passing this off to anybody, but we were just scheduling all these different things: scheduling processing, scheduling secondary fabrication, moving product from harvest to secondary facility, and then moving it again to another warehouse, and then we were selling it. And so we were managing this entire process and not really leveraging a distributor network. And for a while, this was working, pretty well. We were growing dramatically, and we were starting to sell to restaurants and small grocers and chefs who are making product at rich people's houses, and specialty markets and butcher shops, so we were servicing all sorts of customers, and we started to grow, and we had a warehouse employee and a sales employee, and so the organization was growing really, really big. And then we started to produce CPG products, right? So your prepackaged net weight. So some of these that you can see here, and we've changed our branding a little bit, so you see kind of different labels here. But so the branding and getting out into CPG products was what brought up the distributor, or really the big time distributor network. And so we worked with, these are kind of the distributors that we worked with. Cream Co., I'll start with the bottom here. Cream Co. was a smaller partner who owned a secondary processing facility, and they were a customer of ours. And they were really the first distributor that we started to work with, and they started to buy a lot of our product. But they weren't really reselling anything. That a lot of times they were just buying it and then selling it under their own name. And so it was just a buy-sell agreement. But then as we started, and actually Cream Co. was producing some of these finished goods for us. And so then as we started to get into more of these branded CPG products, what happened was the grocery stores and all these people were like, well, you need to use Tony's or UNFI or US Foods or what have you. And so we were kind of pushed into these relationships, and we jumped in, but we really didn't quite understand all the details of managing these relationships and how complex they were. And so what happened is we grew our business dramatically. We had all of these relationships going at once. Each one of these distributors did business in a slightly different way. And but one of the things we realized in working with all these different distributors, when we talked about this in our previous presentation, we called it the little bites that you get out of your revenue. And in working with each of these distributors, each one of them would take little bites out of your margin as you started to work with them. And so this was super complex, super difficult. We had employees running all over the place, managing all these different relationships. And we were moving a lot of product, but we started to realize with all of these different relationships, all the little bites were really starting to add up and really starting to take, what was compounding into really big bites out of our margin. And so at a certain point, we kind of had to look at ourselves and go, is all of this sustainable? And are these relationships really where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck? Do these companies really have our good intentions in mind? And so we had to make some big changes, because when we looked at all of these different relationships, some of them did and some of them didn't. And so I tell this story because as you're growing your meat brand, it's really exciting when a grocery store or a tech campus or whatever it is wants to work with you, and they want to put your name on the label, and they want to do all of these things. And as I transition this over to Kathryn, she's going to talk about all of the little bites. But what my message really is it's really easy to get into this situation where you've got 3, 4, 5 different distributors that you're working with, but you got to be prepared for the complexity of that. Okay, so what happened? What we did is we had to take a look at what we were doing, and we decided to double down with one particular partner. And then the partner that we chose was Cream Co. And the reason that we chose to work with them is they were smaller. They were not a big bureaucratic organization, and they didn't charge us for every sentence in an email or every movement of a product from one side of the warehouse to the other. And they also understood our brand. We sold together with them, selling side by side, selling customers together. And we had a lot of success in these areas: school districts, hospitals, healthcare, and grocery. And so they were a partner that we could work with hand in hand. They pick up the phone when you call them. Even the CEO picks up the phone when you call them. And so the bigger companies we struggled with and couldn't get the kind of relationship. So we went this direction with Cream Co. And so what that meant is when you look at the structure of how we did things, is you saw that we were managing every aspect of it and then farming out the different pieces in yellow. And you notice what we did is we came back and said, okay, we're going to focus on what we do really well. We really know how to raise quality animals. We know how to get them certified. We know how to finish them. And we know how to produce a really amazing raw material. And then we signed an agreement with Cream Co. to have them be our agent. So they would take, we would transition the product at harvest. They would take it over. They would do all the cut and wrap and the freezing and moving and slacking and storage and all these different things. And then we wrote an agreement with them where they could sell our product under our name with our help. So we still help with branding, business development, marketing, but they handle all of this stuff. And so it was a massive game changer for us. And we still are able to sell our product under our brand name with this agreement with the distributor. And then the most important thing is we don't have any product that's sitting on the shelf. Cream Co. takes all of it. And so we're not managing overage and inventory and sitting. And Kathryn will talk about what happens when you have that inventory at a long line distributor and all of the craziness that goes along with that. So real quick, I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's any questions. If not, I'll kind of wrap this up and transition over to Kathryn. Any questions?
I've got, interestingly, after the last one, I had some of the attendees send me questions for this one. So I've got a list to work through, but I will save those until the end. In interest of leaving room for anybody else. So if anybody has any questions about this so far, pop them into the chat.
Okay, because I can't see it, I'll just continue. But and David, just chime in if there's a pertinent one that I should address, and we can address them all at the end. Yeah.
Oh, here we got one. I've got one real quick from Abby. Could you remind the group of the scale that Richard's Regenerative operates at? How many head?
Sure. So we have between 4 and 8 different ranches we work with. So we have our own cattle program, which is about 350 head of mother cows, and then we have my cousin who runs another ranch that we work with, and he's got about 2,000 mother cows. So and then we're processing about at a high point was about 1,200 head a year, and then we're smaller these days just because of cattle markets and also because of the change that we made. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Somebody had another question.
Abby, if you have any other details you want to follow up on, please feel free.
I was just saying, yes, that answered the question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think, well, the other comment I'll make to that is, as I mentioned, we grew and we were doing everything, every product you can imagine. We also were running our own online store, and we were doing all of our own fulfillment and all of these things. And then when we made the transition over to working with Cream Co. Specifically, we actually reduced our size, and there was a couple other things that we figured out. So I'll talk about, and this is kind of the new structure, right? So we took a step back. We signed a partnership with Cream Co. And then we also signed a partnership with this company called Delivered Cold, and they're out of Austin, Texas. Actually, Taylor, Texas is where they are. And so they are like an online grocery store. So we had our own, Shopify marketplace, and we're doing all this stuff on our own. And then we were only able to distribute to 7 states. And in the process of taking a step back and signing this agreement with Cream Co., we found these guys that delivered cold, and then they are a pick, pack, and ship distribution, what they call a 3PL, pick, pack, and ship. And then they have partnerships with Amazon, Meta, TikTok, and soon to be Walmart. And so what we got in working with them, they're kind of like an online frozen goods distributor. So they're just like a Tony's or UNFI, but it's all online. And so with them, we got exposure, and our products are on Amazon and some of these other places in addition to the delivered cold site. And then Cream Co. is our wholesale. So retail is through delivered cold, wholesale is through Cream Co. And when you go to our website, this is how we kind of instruct customers of how we do business, right? Cream Co.'s wholesale, online retail is here, and then we have local retailers, and then we have an online store. And so our model really changed, but the message here is, as you grow and as you want to start getting out and doing CPG and doing all these things, there's a lot of options. And there's some of these companies are really big and some of them are smaller, like Cream Co. And you got to find that fit. It's kind of like the Goldilocks. You got to find the company that understands you, works with you, is not a pain to work with, and really helps you focus on what you're good at. It took us 8 years to figure all this out, but we finally figured out this structure. And we believe this structure from a distribution wholesale and a distribution retail is what's going to really enable us to carry the ball. One more point I'll make, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kathryn, is that part of the deal that we figured out with our distributor is that we would create finished CPG goods that could be sold via wholesale channels to grocery and whoever, but we could also put it on our retail website. So we have one SKU that can go two different directions, and it lowered our cost of production, and it really enabled us to take one product and pass it through two different channels. So that's what I mean about partnerships. If you can find a company that will really help you, you can both help each other accomplish what you want to accomplish. And with that, I'm going to press pause here and hand it over to Kathryn, who's going to, unless there's questions.
I've got a couple of questions for you before we do. The first one's from Sarah, and she asks, how many Richard's Regenerative Ranch stores can there be in your more local region? Are you filling the local demands? Could there be more businesses like yours?
So that's a great question. I think that's a big industry question. And to that, I would say that yes, there is, I think there is a movement towards regional that is occurring in the country. I think we've all seen and COVID especially exposed that, when a lot of these big plants shut down during COVID, and all of a sudden supplies were like, cut. I think, and also people want to know their farmer and rancher. So I think I know me, personally, my Instagram feed, I think it's because of, I talk about beef and cattle all the time, and my feed is all meat companies, and I'm seeing meat companies, popping up all over the country. So yes, that's an answer to your question. I think there's going to be a lot more and more local, Stemples and Richards and all over the country.
Great. There's one more question from Abby, but I'm going to put that one on ice just for a second because it's part of a larger question that I'm going to ask right after Kathryn's segment. So hold tight, Abby.
All right, let's see if I can get my sharing up and running too. See that, and then do slideshow.
All right. So yeah, I really appreciated Tom sharing kind of the journey for Richards because it's going to tie in super well to this next stage of. I'm going to kind of go back to some of the things that Tom talked about and just sort of slot it into buckets so you can think about your own business and what feels right for you and how, whether you're already working with a distributor or you're thinking about getting started, what might be the right fit. So, uh, at Richards, they've tried all three of these. They still do some of them. And so this is kind of like the three big buckets of types of distribution, right? So you can do it yourself. You own a warehouse space, you lease a warehouse space, you have your own trucks, you do your own deliveries. That's a great way to get started and maybe a place to stay if it's the right fit for you. And you're going to think about that as that distribution margin or markup, basically the cost and the revenue you're going to make from distribution is built right into the delivered price. So when you're thinking about pricing your products, you're going to kind of fold that in. The next sort of step from that, as kind of the way I think of it, is this like fee for service. You still want to manage those customer relationships. You want to be the one on the phone with the meat cutters at the grocery store, or the chef at the restaurant, or the food service director at the school. And you want to really manage that relationship and take orders from them, invoice the customer, but you need wheels on the ground. You need someone to make those deliveries. You don't have 6 trucks. You can't deliver across a 500-mile radius. So you're really looking for a delivery service in that case. And I've seen that work as well, where you partner with a distributor. They already have routes and trucks out there, and they'll perform distribution as a service for you, but they don't really take ownership of the product. This can be particularly beneficial in a full carcass program because nobody cares about carcass utilization like you do, right? Where you're like, I have to sell every single part of the animal. I cannot sell 75 cases of tenderloin a week because 75 cases don't exist off of the load of cattle I processed. And again, most meat distributors and meat buyers, the bulk of the meat out there sold is commodity. So there aren't the same limitations because just of the sheer volume available. So again, that full carcass, like when you're really driving to sell every single part of that animal, you might have to take control of that process a little bit. But it also takes work. And Tom attested to this with like, you have to have employees. It's very management intensive to make sure every part of that carcass leaves every week or every month, and manage all those relationships. And then lastly, the most traditional distribution model, I mean, this exists across all categories of food and other goods as well, is a reseller. You sell to a distributor and they turn around and sell that product to the customer. And in the case of meat, that margin or markup that the distributor is going to make, it can be dollars per pound, and really it's cents per pound, right? It might be like 10 cents a pound, 20 cents a pound, or it's a percentage markup. And depending on the type of accounts you're targeting or the existing relationship the distributor may have with the account, it'll vary between those two. So, we've got these 3 primary types, and you're like, what's right for me? How do I think about this? And you can, again, I put them in this order on purpose. Like it's self-distributed, you do it all yourself. The reseller is they do it more or less all. And the fee for service is kind of in the middle, like you're taking on some of the responsibilities and so is the distributor. So when I think about like, what's the right business model? The things I would think about is, first of all, capital. Do I have enough money to own a warehouse space or lease a warehouse space? Do I have enough money to go and buy trucks? Like, can I do this? And along with that capital, like, do I have the money to buy stuff, and do I have the money to pay people? Because doing your own distribution, means that you need folks to do this, right? You need warehouse staff, you might need drivers. If you're going to take on all those parts, you're going to want salespeople and account managers, et cetera. What are you offering your customers, right? So most of the customers you're going to go out there and work with already work with a distributor, whether they're a restaurant or a retail grocery store, and they are used to a certain level of service. They want deliveries. Well, like restaurants like deliveries multiple times per week. They want you to bring them meat on Tuesday and on Friday. They want order cutoff times that are fairly generous. It's not uncommon in food service for restaurants to be able to order up until 10 p.m. the night before and get delivery the next day. So if you're small and you're doing this yourself, that can be really tricky where you're like, oh gosh, I'm still bringing these orders in pretty late in the day and then I got to flip them in the morning and get them out the door. Grocery stores do not like the too many trucks problem. The lamb comes in on one truck, the chicken comes in on another, the beef on another. Like they want to aggregate across their proteins. And it will often push you to work with a distributor that they already work with because it's just logistically becomes really challenging to have all these deliveries and all these ordering platforms. Minimums for orders and deliveries, like, are you going to drive 50 miles to deliver one case? Like, what's the right fit for you, you know? And then I put in this kind of like, et cetera, where there are benefits of working with distributors that a lot of customers are used to, right? So that a distributor will break cases for them of, the chuck rolls come 2 per case, but I actually only want 1 piece. They will do further processing, as Tom mentioned, that's pretty common for some of the larger distributors to do portion cutting and value-added processing. Most distributors offer credit term discounts, right? Net 30 are the terms, but if you pay in 10 days, you get a 1% discount. So some of these things that the customer is used to, and that's a level of service that they're expecting and hoping for. Another thing I would look at is cash flow or AR. So again, working, particularly that reseller relationship can be so helpful, where you are able to sell that inventory to a distributor, get paid in a timely manner, and not have to chase a bunch of accounts for money they owe you. So again, thinking about your own cash flow and position, if you're self-distributing, you're financing that inventory all the way through until you get the check. And then also, again, thinking about kind of what's right for you at the stage of your business. As you go into more, I would say like sophisticated or corporatized levels of distribution, there's going to be expectations around product liability insurance and third-party audits and food safety and recall plans. So thinking kind of where your business is at and is this the right fit for you? I only have a few more slides, but I can pause there for a couple of questions too, David, if you think. What do you think?
Well, one question that came up, and Abby touched on this, and this is another couple of questions that came in that mirrored it. How do you start the conversation with the distributor? Abby asked, how did you get in contact with Creamco and the online retailer for Texas? People want to know, like, where are you going door to door? Who's the cold call going to? How do you do that? How do you start it?
Yeah. I can start on that,
Yeah,
Kathryn, if you want. So it's a little bit of both. I remember when we started, we went around to all these different distributors and we said to them, hey, we're going to have a pallet a month. and they all looked at us like, beat it. And we were like, what's the matter? Like, so yeah, it's a little rough when you're starting because you're small and you don't have a lot of product that you're moving. And we were lucky that we found a guy, the company called Preferred Meats out of Oakland, a guy named Bala Karanda, and he took a chance on us, right? And it was interesting because Creamco came in and bought his facility. And that's kind of how the Creamco relationship started, was they took over the plant and then they modernized it and all these kinds of things. And that was how the Creamco thing started. So that was kind of serendipitous, I guess, if you will. The delivered cold thing was me on the phone over 6 months, just calling this company, that company, this company, that company. And finally, one of these guys at a giant facility in the Midwest was like, you should call these guys in Texas. They're smaller, but they're pretty cool and they're doing some neat stuff. That's how it happened. But I think, when we were doing all this, there was no NMPAN, right? There was no, these things we didn't have these presentations to go check out. And so um, leverage the network now. This is a great network, and make calls, send emails to David or the two of us, and we'll help you. You know what I mean? Because that's, we didn't have that. I don't know about Kathryn's story, but we had to figure this all out, and so we're more than happy to help and direct you where we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's also, so to some degree, and a little bit with what Tom was saying, if you go in to a distributor and you have no sales and no customers, like they're not super interested in carrying you because, right, they have this really expensive piece of real estate. They have a cold storage facility. And the way that they pay for that real estate every month is turns. That product comes in and product goes out the door. So if there's nobody pulling your product out the door each week, like why would they slot you on the shelf? So frequently, you have to get the customer first. You get the grocery store or the restaurant. And they're often going to guide you towards a distributor because it goes back to that too many trucks problem. Like they might say, we work with Cream Co. And do you guys we work with Cream Co. Do you guys work with Cream Co? And you're like, well, not yet, but let me go talk to them. Right. And so kind of giving you that warm introduction to a distributor. You'll also find that the customers that are interested in your product, right? They're interested in local or the attributes you have, whether that's grass-fed or pasture-raised or non-GMO. They're going to kind of aggregate around roughly the same types of distributors. Like if you're selling local grass-fed regenerative beef, you're probably not coming in on the Cisco truck, right? Like you're going to aggregate towards a certain type of distributor. And so I would just say also talk to your friends in the industry in your region. And then again, the types of accounts you want to sell to, like whether it's a natural foods co-op or a restaurant that specializes in local. So,
and I would agree.
Unfortunately.
I would say I agree 100% too. And then it really comes down to the relationship and getting to know some of these people, because some of the people you're gonna really mesh with, and it'll be kind of easy. It's a relationship, and so you're really gonna want to find the folks that are easy to work with and you like each other and all these kinds of things. And so it sometimes takes a little bit of time, but it's a process.
Yeah, I agree with that. So as you're thinking about, we talked about kind of these three types: self-distributed, fee-for-service, and then a reseller relationship. And Tom shared about kind of finding the right size partner, but having maybe the Goldilocks effect, having tried out some of the really big distributors to begin with. And that's where, as you're thinking about it, and if you're entertaining these ideas of working with some of the larger distributors, so in natural foods, that's like UNFI and KeHE going into grocery. It's US Foods into food service, cafeterias, et cetera. Build your margins accordingly, because there tends to be a lot of fees associated with the larger distributors. And it's generally higher in packaged products. So when I say CPG, that means consumer packaged goods. So things like a 1-pound brick of ground beef, an 8-ounce package of pork sausages, a 3-ounce pack of jerky. All those packaged products tend to have more fees associated with them than boxed meat, like, subprimals of pork and beef and lamb. Just to give some examples as you're thinking about this, because some of these, we were laughing before the call that like, there's a fee for things you didn't even know there could be a fee for. And so and a lot of these fees are repeated at both the distributor and the retailer as you get into larger retailers. So there's things called slotting fees, which is like, it's a fee to put you on the shelf. It's a one-time fee. It's not recurring, but you got to pay it. New item setups. You're going to you got into a grocery store and you've got 4 awesome flavors of pork sausage and you're so excited to launch them. That is 8 new item setup fees. 4 to the distributor, 4 to the retailer. They range. They might be $250. They might be $1,000. A lot of times retailers will ask for free fills where they're like, this is a new product. We don't know if it's going to sell. We want 1 free case per store. promotions, putting things on sales, etc. So I don't want to like scare everyone off with the fees too much, but know that they're there and build accordingly. You are going to want at least at the bare minimum a 20% margin in subprimals and boxed product that's going to go into a butcher case. And really probably more like 30, 35 in CPG. Tom, you can tell me if that's like that needs to be higher. Yeah.
Well, so like online, if you're selling it online, you're going to want 30 to 45%,
Yeah.
depending on the product, right?
Yes.
And the other thing too is this is on the retail side. So we talk about distributors. On the 3PL side, there's the discount you offer the customer, there's the box and all those fees. And then there's also, these days, there's like affiliates, right? Where, it's an athlete or somebody in your network and they get a 5% cut. And so there's the marketing aspect of this and all these little, we call these the little bites out of your margin. They add up. So be ready and just be prepared and make sure you've got room.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're starting into this and you're like, oh, this is great. I got a 15% gross margin. I'm set. Like, no, you're going to need that to be higher to make this work. And then the last
I would make one other comment too. There is also I know I'm building a market and building a brand and you might have to lose some money a little bit here and there, but just be conscious about how much you want to give up and maybe you'll lose 5%, but you got to figure that out on your own P&L. But sometimes you can do that, or you can lose money on one product and make it up on another,
yes.
Right? So there's a lot of levers and puts and takes that you can do to manage all this.
Yeah, that's a great point. That some of the things you may have to be more competitive on to get market share, and then there's other places where you can try to make that up.
Yeah.
And then lastly, just, again, and this is really true for the large national distributors more so than the regional guys. So just helping people kind of understand the range of players and kind of business styles. It's fairly common for the large distributors to pay you or pay you late. So the way they collect those fees is you send them an invoice for $20,000 and they send you a check for $16,000. And that's a short pay, right? Because they're like, oh, well, but you had all these fees, you had all this money, you owed us. Fighting that is like, I don't know, trying to get your cable disconnected. It's just impossible. You're kind of on the phone, sort of untangling this thing forever. That being said, the Lorax speaks for the trees. I'm here to speak for the distributors in that I love working with distributors. I would not be in this business without them. I think that if you find the right one, it is such a valuable relationship because it's hard to do this all on your own. And if you have that relationship with the right type of distributor, you really can grow your business and increase sales and revenue, right? Like they have a geographic reach of they can go farther afield than you can. They have accounts that they can get you into where they're like, oh, we already sell to so-and-so and you'd be perfect for them. Customer service, staff, cash flow issue, again, of getting paid in a timely manner. So I will never be one to scare people off from working with distributors as a whole. It's like, you just got to find that right one for you. And so, when we think about in this business, again, most of us in here have some sort of attribute to our product, right? That's local, it's pasture raised, it's grass fed. I don't think you're on this call if you're just selling commodity meat. And so that where we have inefficiencies in our business, that is not an attribute that offers benefit to our customer, right? Our attributes there's something special about our production, how we're raising our animals or how we're making our products or where we're sourcing from. There's something special about our finished goods. Our meat is really delicious because of these reasons. But the in-between for our customers, they mostly just want it as efficient as possible, right? Like they want efficient processing that extracts the most value from the carcass so that we can offer affordable prices. They want good packaging that isn't going to leak or bust. They want nice cold warehouses where stuff is held at the right temp, right? So thinking of, and Tom, you touched on this as like Richard sort of took a look at like what are our strengths, and I think that that is true. Again, we find that right distribution partner. They have strengths and assets in this business that maybe aren't in your wheelhouse, and so really, again, finding that right relationship can have such a benefit to your business to grow. And then I'll just plug the guide again. There's if you love talking about selling meat, here we are. So please do download our wholesale guide, and I'll stop there and let us get to some questions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Kathryn and Tom. That I always learn so much from you guys, and it also feels good to feel seen when it comes to the relationship with brokers and distributors. Okay, first question comes from Kevin. Kevin says, "How do you get a 20% gross profit when beef prices are so high right now?"
Not a 20% gross profit, 20%
Yeah.
gross margin on cost of goods sold.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you know what? That's it's not an easy thing to do. But what I've learned, and I'm betting Kathryn's similar, but when it comes to boxed beef and stuff like that, where you're selling primals, it's a little easier, right? You're selling wholesale, but then when you're talking about a fillet or a ribeye, you're talking about a $39, $49 or $40 steak or whatever, right? What I've found is that bundling, frankly, is so what we've learned is you price your product at like, so let's say it's your ribeye, you price it at $35, $39, whatever it is. And then you look at your inventory, you're like, how fast do I want to move this inventory? And then you create a bundle like buy 3, get 4, buy 5, get 6, or whatever it is. And then you look at what that does and what are the bites? What are the bites out of your revenue that you're going to take? And then you make sure that you have a margin at the top. Because what happens is, like from a retail perspective, if you price your product at $12.99, everybody looks at it and goes, okay, whatever, I'm going to go look and see what else is out there. If you price it at $12.99, but then you have a bundled price and it makes it $11.20, they go, oh, that's a deal. They buy, right? So that's one of the tricks that I've learned. And the bundles can be all sorts. It can be buy 5, get 6. It can be buy 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these. The other thing too is grinds right now. Right now, when steaks are super expensive, this is what we were talking about earlier, where you can price your ribeyes and strips and fillets at a 2, 3, 4, 5% margin, right? And then be making 15, 20% on the grind, because the grind is such a cheaper product, right? And everyone's buying grind. So it's all that balance in terms of pricing and this is also where having really thinking about your distributor relationship. And this is what we really worked on with Cream Co., which is what we did is we said, okay, we're going to go out and sell an account like Sprouts or whatever, Whole Foods or whatever, big account. And we're going to move a ton of product. And we're going to put our label on it. And we're going to take that same product and we're going to sell it on our online store. And so what we could do is we could piggyback on the production, on the big production of product, get a cheaper wholesale price, and then take that into our online retail. So that's where having a really good distributor who really works with you on pricing to help you be successful, to help them move. Like, it's all about moving the product and working together to figure out, how do we move all these tenderloins at $50 a unit? And so it's all that balance. And that's where having a good relationship where you can call them and say, hey, this isn't working. Can we sit down and go through this spreadsheet and figure out how to make this work? Not every distributor is going to do that. They're going to cut you short or whatever it is. So it's really about the relationship in the end.
And I think that, I think that's a huge part of it. And then again, on that, because the cattle are so expensive, it's that carcass utilization too. Like, can you extract the maximum value out of every single part? And so really finding, which presents then this very complicated book of business, right? To sell every single part off the animal, you need kind of a wide variety of accounts. So those relationships at all levels across all types of customers become really critical.
Yeah, and that's also, Kathryn mentioned, that working with distributors can be great. It can be a challenge, but if you find the right partner, it can be great. And literally before this call, I was on the phone with our distributor, and we were talking about tenderloins and steaks and the yield loss, right? And how to take those trimmings and make beef sticks and all sorts of other things. So like, again, it's that partnership of the distributor comes to you and says, the price has got to be this because we have this loss. And we're like, okay, well, what do we do with that loss? How do we monetize that? And so when you have a good relationship and a partner, you can figure those things out, and you can figure out how to monetize all the things. So nothing goes to waste, and you're making a decent margin.
Speaking of product mixes and balancing the carcass overall aggregate gross margin by playing with different prices and having some loss leaders that move in high volume, and that there was a webinar that aired on Wednesday of this week through the Flower Hill Institute. It was part of the Meat and Poultry Processing Technical Assistance Program, and if anybody had the chance to see that, or if you didn't, I presented a tool that allows you to insert several different sales channels with different carcass breakdowns at different margins, at different yields, so that you can kind of pull those levers, because there's a weighted aggregate gross profit calculator at the bottom that shows you what your overall is based on the volume. So it's a really cool tool. If you didn't have a chance to check it out, it's more or less what Tom and Kathryn are talking about, probably a simplified version of what they're talking about. But if you want to check that out, again, it's on the Flower Hill Institute website. And while we're answering these questions, I'll try to get you the link if you're interested in seeing what that can look like. I've got a couple minutes for a few more questions if we can get to them. I've got one question here. What is a broker? How do you get a hold of them? And where do they fit into this?
So funny because there's like two types. Tom and I were talking about this yesterday. Tom, why don't you talk about the kind of the aggregators like we've sold to? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So there's two types really. There is the I have products sitting in the freezer and I want to move it, and how do I do it quickly? And then there's the broker of I want to get into a grocery store and I have no relationships, and there's organizations that have all these relationships, and you can form a working relationship with a broker, and they can try to put you into all these fancy places. Both of them take a commission. One of them you use in an emergency, and it's very like reactive. And the other broker relationship is proactive, where you're trying to strategically go get your product somewhere. And then, so like an example of the reactive one would be the one that Kathryn and I talked about the other day. It was a company called Marcus Foods. And they're one of these companies, they're out of Texas, and you got product you need to move. You call them up and say, hey, I got 500 pounds of strip loin. I want it out. They'll sell it for you, and they'll take a cut. It won't necessarily be the price you want to get for it, but you'll be able to move it, and it won't be in the freezer. And as Kathryn says, the freezer is not a sale. So they're one example. And then Kathryn, you had another one. I'm blanking on the name of the other one. What was the other one?
I know, I was trying to remember. There's some I've worked with at a previous job, and I cannot remember the name of the company because it changed. But that kind of, again, that retail broker where they have relationships in retail grocery stores, and they go in and they rep all kinds of products, right? They rep meat, but they also represent, butter and chips and granola bars. And so again, they're kind of boots on the ground where like if you're expanding into a new market, say I've got a beef company in Nashville and I want to get into Chicago, right? For some reason, like I have a chance to get into an account there and it's like, well, I don't really have sales staff there and I don't have people to go and check the stores and make sure everything's looking good and chit chat with the meat managers. Then you can use brokers to do that. It really doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in the boxed meat industry. It's really mostly for CPG. And honestly, unless you're doing like 25 million in sales or more, I don't think it's worth it. Because nobody's going to sell like you're going to, right? Like you care about your product the most and your staff does. So, but I do think I've worked with Marcus Technologies in the past. Marcus, I think they're Marcus Foods now, and just fantastic people and really good about helping you move product where you're like, this needs to go. So.
Are you guys okay with one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Do I create the contract or do they? And what are some things I need to keep an eye out for in their contract, or what are some nuanced things that I need to include to CYA?
My reaction to that contract, what contract?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When you look at like a US Foods or a Tony's contract, it's terrible. And it's completely one-sided, and they can basically do whatever they want to do and you have to take it. And when, as a small company, when you try to negotiate that contract, it's not received very well, right? They won't make any changes. If you come in and you're, Cargill or whatever Safeway grocery stores, yeah, you've got a lot of leverage and you can negotiate whatever you want. When you're small, you really can't. And so when we were super small, working with a lot of these companies, we just signed. We had no choice. We signed the agreements, and we kind of had to deal with it. And that's where a bigger distributor, somebody who's got double, triple, maybe 10 times the sales that you do, they can have a different conversation than you can. And that's also where, you can have a distributor. So what's interesting is we still work with Tony's, even though we work with Greenco. Right, because Greenco's smaller, but they don't have a network that's nationwide, right? So there's a lot of this nuance that goes on, and when you're small, it's really hard. It's hard, if not impossible, to negotiate these contracts, and that's where these relationships come in, and they're extremely helpful, because you'll have somebody on your side, right? And negotiating with you. So that's also where a good distributor relationship comes in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you need to add something to that. Yeah.
All right. Good deal. Thank you for explaining that. We got one last question that popped in. I have directed everybody maybe to send you further questions via email. So I don't know if you guys would want to pop your email in just real quick into the chat. For everybody to have that. And yeah, I also got a couple of emails that were very relatable that shared some pain points that folks have experienced. It sounds like some pretty poor experiences over the months and years. So I do encourage those folks who sent me those very frustrated emails or some lesser frustrated emails to definitely reach out and figure out how we can help and shed some light on some of those issues, because I know it can feel demoralizing when things go sideways with distributors, no doubt. So thanks to everybody for all of the great questions leading up to this. Kathryn, Tom, thank you so much. I always learn so much from both of you, and I really hope that people got a lot out of this and that the conversation keeps going, because to your point, Tom and Kathryn, regional meat supply chains do seem to be taking off, and larger and larger sales streams seem to be embracing them. So maybe the barrier to entry will lower, but the challenges will certainly stay the same. So thanks, everybody. Keep an eye out for the replay. I should have that up by dinner time tonight, if not sooner. It'll be on the NMPAN YouTube page. I posted the link in the chat. And Siku, please be safe on the rest of your trip to Atlanta on your ride. We will expect to see you on the next one. And everybody else, please have a great weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.